All right, so if you happen to be living in the northeastern portion of the United States of America right now, and you happen to go outside over the last couple of days, then you're probably already aware of what I'm going to be talking about in this video. But for everybody else, I just want to give everybody a quick rundown in terms of why New York City and other parts and like Philly and stuff kind of look like an absolute hellscape at the moment. So over the last couple of days, there have just been absolutely massive wildfires that have been raging across Canada. Basically, it seems like in most provinces, like all across the country. And of course, that smoke has now been traveling down to the United States. So I'm going to give you guys just a basic rundown in terms of why this is happening, how long is this going to last, how does this play into the lack of meaningful action towards addressing climate change, and then of course we are going to get to some of the absolutely bizarre responses from prominent conservative media personalities to this happening, and basically sort of like praising the toxic fumes in the air. So we'll get to that here in a second, but first, just the basic rundown here from NBC News. They say Canadian wildfire smoke blankets the United States. So what are they talking about here? They say hazardous air quality levels continue to overwhelm parts of the eastern United States today as a fresh wave of smoke from Canadian wildfires billowed across the border. Now, keep in mind, borders are kind of just like lines on a map, right? Okay, don't actually protect us from, things like climate change. So maybe we should have a little bit of solidarity, between countries to actually address this, take on the power of the fossil fuel lobbyists and the fossil fuel industry in order to transition towards renewable energy to try to mitigate some of these tangential effects and consequences from climate change. But, I guess maybe the alternative is we just build like a giant wall that goes up to the ends of the sky along the Canadian border. That's another option. So I'll let you guys decide which one of those is better. But they continue. They say major metro areas are expected to see unhealthy air quality levels for all age groups throughout the day, including in New York City, Boston, Philly, and Washington, D.C., which is obviously where I am right now. And I went outside today, when I was going to work and all of that stuff. It is like terrible right now. I mean, you can feel it in your lungs. You can smell it in the air. It sort of smells like you're having like a barbecue cookout almost. I mean, it smells like wood burning, like when you're sitting by a campfire or something like that. And you can see it. I mean, I saw pictures earlier that were taken from the steps of the Capitol building. And usually you'd be able to see all of these different monuments, like the Washington Monument. And it was just like a straight blanket, like a smoke screen. You couldn't even see the Washington Monument from the Capitol building. So it's pretty bad right now, even in Washington, D.C., and we haven't even been getting the worst of it. But they say officials have warned residents affected by the haze to stay indoor and wear masks outdoors. So they say millions under air quality alert. So just some other bullet points here. Around 123 million people, about like a third of our population here in the U.S., are under air quality alerts. They say New York City continued to have the worst air quality in the world, according to IQAir.com, a tracking service. Worst air quality in the world. Okay, so this is a terrible situation, right, to say the least. They say more than 400 wildfires are burning in Canada. 400 at the same time. And these are giant fires we're talking about here. They say President Joe Biden pledged to send additional firefighters to America's neighbor to the north, and areas from the mid-Atlantic to the northeast should finally see reprieve by Saturday as wind shifts push the smoke away. So I guess we can hope for that. Now, I wanted to just give you guys a little bit of like imagery in terms of what this looks like here. You got people who are on the ground wearing masks. That seems a bit intense there, but go for it, dude. More people. I mean, it sort of looks like people are saying it looks like the sort of like the overlay effect that a lot of Hollywood movies put when they're like in the Middle East in some scene or in like Mexico in some scene. If you ever watched Breaking Bad, it sort of looks like that right now, right? We have another picture here. Forget what this building is called, the Chrysler Building, or is this the Empire State Building? I don't fucking know. You got the One World Trade Center there. You got people taking whatever selfies, goddamn, and all of this shit, right? So it basically looks absolutely insane. It looks like a hellscape. Those were kind of even mild pictures from some of the other ones that I've seen recently, but we'll move on. Okay, so now I want to get to why is this happening? How does this tie into climate change and our lack of action on that issue? So there was a good write-up here by Vox, which of course will be in the description, as are all of my sources for my videos. So if you want to go read the entirety of it, but I just want to hit a couple of the major points here. They say, number one, why is Eastern Canada burning? So they say the summer often brings severe wildfires to Western Canada, especially as climate change continues to dry out vegetation and heat up the atmosphere. 2021 was a particularly devastating year, with blazes destroying entire towns. They say provinces in the east, including Quebec and Nova Scotia, are somewhat somewhat more safeguarded from fires, or at least the more devastating ones. And they say air coming off the North Atlantic Ocean typically keeps the region humid and cooler, making it less likely to burn. But basically they go on to say, as climate change is getting worse, you're seeing the drying up of these areas, and because this vegetation is dry and it doesn't have that sort of like moisture to it, it makes it that much easier for these wildfires to get, 5 times larger than they otherwise would have been. But they move on here. They say, number 2, when will the smoke disappear and the fires stop? So that previous article said roughly Saturday, right? But they say the reason there's so much smoke spreading south into parts of the U.S., in a word, is weather. A large low-pressure system above Nova Scotia that's swirling counterclockwise has created winds that flow from south from Quebec and then east towards New York and other coastal cities. It will take a change in the weather to clear the smoke from these eastern cities, though don't expect relief in the near term. Absolutely amazing. They say on Thursday morning, air quality in New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and other regions were hazardous. They say conditions will likely remain poor in these regions through Friday morning, at which point wind may shift the directions and hopefully at least blow some of this shit out of these cities, right? But they finish off here, and this is an important part of this before we move on to the conservative responses to this situation here, and I'll throw on my headphones to get prepared for that. But, is this actually dangerous, right? Should we be taking this seriously? A lot of people, as you saw in those pictures, were out and wearing masks and N95s and all of that stuff. So is it actually that bad? They say yes, very much so, especially for people who already have lung or heart conditions, people who are pregnant, and children. So a lot of people, okay, I don't know if you guys know this, but a lot of people, especially Americans, have lung and heart conditions. A lot of people are also pregnant, and not exactly the population you would want to be, having negative health aspects right now. And they say children as well. There are a lot of children, right? So this is something obviously we should be taking seriously. And even if you are perfectly healthy and you're not pregnant and you're not a child, it still could have a negative effect on you, right? This is just the communities in which it is going to be especially disastrous for. But they say, here's how Vox's resident physician and health reporter, Karen Landman, put it. They say breathing polluted air affects the body in a few different ways. Larger pieces of particulate matter, including tiny particles of soot and dust, can irritate the linings of people's airways and their noses, mouths, throats, and lungs, and smaller bits along with toxic gases and molecules called volatile organic compounds can sneak from the lungs into the bloodstream, where they can travel to other organs and cause a wide range of short and long-term problems. Okay, so it's bad. It's not good. It's not something we should be, taking lightly. It's not the end of the world, but it's not a good thing, and it's not something we should be praising and encouraging people to go outside, right? But now we get to the conservative response to this. And a lot of people have also been saying recently, just during this whole wave of like conservative outrage about like meaningless things and basically pushing back on like any regulation or any policies that would actually take us into the future and progress us as a species. Basically a lot of people are saying like, if we were to, have a situation right now where we had to address something like lead paint again, thankfully we did that decades ago, right? But imagine if we still were using lead paint and then we came forward with a bunch of different studies that said like, oh, this is disastrous for your health, for your family's health, your kids' health, and all of that stuff. These conservatives would have opposed that. Okay, I can virtually guarantee you that if we put the prospects of banning something like lead paint or lead in gasoline or whatever the case may be, something that is just objectively bad for human beings' health, that these conservatives would have opposed it. Because look at how they're responding to this situation. I mean, this isn't something that should be controversial, right? But they say here, as pointed out here by Internet Hippo, the chyron that they have down at the bottom, radical left uses wildfire smoke as a climate cudgel. What? Okay, so he's trying to, I guess, and this is from the Ingram angle, right? They're trying to imply that, like, what? The leftists in this country, radical and woke neo-Marxists, are just using this to perpetuate, like, the hoax of climate change? It's like, no, we just read the article on this, right? I mean, the science behind this is not that complicated, right? Obviously, I'm not a climate scientist. I'm sure it does get much more complicated when you're doing all of this modeling, but the general idea of this is not that complicated. We have a warming planet. We have more volatile conditions. We are disrupting sort of the flow of all of these different streams that happen within or around the world that basically dictate where, cold fronts are going to be moving in, where warm fronts are going to be moving in. And as a part of this, disruption to our stable climate, or otherwise stable climate minus the human beings and the output that we have with greenhouse gases, that is going to lead to like drier vegetation and an increased likelihood that these fires are not only going to start, but that they're going to be even worse than they otherwise would have been. It's not a complicated thing. It's not a controversial thing, but they're using using rhetoric like this. I mean, it's like they're in favor of the wildfires. They're in favor of the toxic smoke almost, right? Because, I mean, this is like the one thing you would actually talk about if you wanted to talk about what can we do about preventing these types of things from happening in the future, right? You would be talking about climate change. That's like first and foremost the main thing you should be talking about. And he, of course, quote tweeted this with an old tweet back from 2022, where he says, sarcastically, obviously, it's wrong to politicize a tragedy by trying to address one of its main causes. And this is like the entire conservative shtick. This is their MO, is like, and you see this with something like gun violence, right? You see a mass shooting where they're once again using an AR-15, you know, these types of assault weapons that are military grade, that are specifically designed to rip apart human beings. And then a mass shooting happens, and they're like, well, we can't talk about the guns. Don't politicize this. And it's like, well, then what the fuck are we supposed to talk about? Thoughts and prayers? I mean, that's it. That's literally the extent to which your political analysis is able to go. And it's like, literally, yes, for a lot of these people, yes, that is the extent they're willing to have these conversations. And so now we have another one here, as pointed out by Matthew Gertz, not to be confused with Matthew Gates, who he frequently does get confused with and gets railed because of that. But Matthew Gertz says here, telling my audience of seniors to step out into the orange cloud and take a deep breath to own the libs, because Jesse Waters here has a Chiron once again saying Jesse braves hazardous air quality, hazardous, as if what? It's not hazardous? Is that the claim we're making, that toxic fumes coming from wildfires are good for you, or that it's neutral? I mean, like, this is just like not or shouldn't be controversial stuff. I mean, this is just like basic shit we're talking about here. And then we get to this clip, which is somehow even worse, right? So I'm not actually going to play it just to save a little bit of time here. But this guy, this Fox guest, and I don't know who this guy is, but, you know, not exactly a climate scientist or a physician or a health expert, to say the least. But he said, there's just no health risk. We have this kind of air in India and China all the time. No public health emergency. This doesn't kill anybody. This doesn't make anybody cough. This is not a health event. Particulate matter is just very fine soot. They're innocuous. Okay, listen. First of all, this is probably the single dumbest line you could have possibly gone with, because it's so easily disprovable, right? He says, we have this kind of air in India and China, no public health emergency, there's no health risk, okay? You can go Google this real quick, okay? If you want to pause the video and Google it, I did some background research into this. They are estimating that there was like a 9 to 10 year drop off in life expectancy in cities in India like Delhi, okay, because of the poor air quality there. If you were to live in a city in China or India or any other country that has this degree of poor air quality, it could shave almost a decade off of your lifespan. Okay, so the idea there's no health risk, I mean, these people, they live in the exact moment right in front of their faces. They walk outside for, 10 minutes or something, right, on their break, and then they come back inside and they're still alive, and so they say, oh, well, there's no health risk, right? There's nothing to worry about here. As if, like, there's no potential long-term implications from breathing in toxic fumes. I mean, nothing at all. There's no health risk, according to this guy, right? And then we finish off here. As Newsmax Greg Kelly, and I am going to play this clip because this one was even better than the last one, right? He praises the smoke from Canadian wildfires, saying, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful, interesting aura. Okay, let's just go ahead and jump into this, man. Here we got Greg Kelly from Newsmax.
The orange smog here in New York City. Have you heard about it? Many cities on the East Coast primarily have this big blanket of orange smog right over the top of it. Our woke friends to the north in Canada, their forest fires got out of hand, and, well, this is what we're dealing with. It's complicating some people's lives, but it's manageable. I'll tell you, it actually smells like wood smoke. It's not an unpleasant odor, to be honest. It's kind of weird when it seeps into the building, but outdoors, I can deal with it. Folks with respiratory issues, though, that's a real thing, a real complication. The White House is trying to exploit this, saying it's all because of global warming and the normal talking points that go with that. I don't think that's the case. I think it's a forest fire. This actually has happened a couple of times before in history, and for the time being, we can live with it, but it is pretty. It actually is pretty. It's a beautiful, interesting aura the city has right now. All right, now this.
All right, just look at the picture that this guy has on screen right now. This is a beautiful, interesting aura. Dude, this looks like we got teleported into the gates of hell. What are you talking about? Okay? Now, I mean, again, on top of that, the immediacy that he treats something like this, right? He's like, oh, maybe if you have some other health impact, maybe it'll affect you. I don't know, but let's not really worry about it, right? And then he just completely disregards the climate change aspect of this and is implying that Biden is politicizing this. I mean, what are we really talking about here? Okay, again, it's not a complicated situation that we're trying to describe in how, the human output of, CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gases has a direct implication on the warming of the planet over many years and many decades. I mean, we have seen this trajectory absolutely skyrocket since the Industrial Revolution. Okay, and we know the consequences from that, right? They still pretend to this day like this is somehow debatable, like it's up in the air. I mean, you can have debates about how exactly do we address this, right? Are we going too far, too aggressively in some circumstances by doing whatever? You could have maybe a fair debate on that, but to pretend as if climate change has no effect on any of this, I mean, to condense what he just said there, his basic premise, right? He says, oh, well, this has happened a couple of times throughout history, right? Okay, yes, I'll concede that, Greg. There have been wildfires throughout history. That has in fact happened. Same as there's been hurricanes, same as there's been tornadoes and flash flooding and all of these different, weather-related events. That's not the question. Okay, this man sees, severely increasing severity and frequency of things like hurricanes or whatever as a result of climate change. And he turns around and he's like, well, there was a hurricane a couple of months ago and, it's happened before. So what's the big deal? They have no ability to have an actual structural analysis of this issue and how we are contributing to it. Either that, either they're just too stupid to be able to understand this, to actually listen to people who spend their lives studying this, right? Or they just are in the pocket of things like fossil fuel and fossil fuel corporations. I mean, it's pick one or two, okay? Because there's not really a good faith argument to be making that climate change is not playing any role in this whatsoever. I mean, it's just absolutely delusional, but this is just every issue now. Every single issue. We saw this with the gas stoves debate, for example, which was stupid anyways because nobody was actually proposing national legislation to rip out the gas stove from your house and take it away from you or something like that, right? And install a woke electric stove or whatever the fuck, right? Nobody was actually proposing that legislation. But they had this whole conversation about how, the left wants to take away your gas stoves because it's bad for your health. And, they're going to come and steal it and all of that stuff. And it's like, well, hang on a second. First of all, again, nobody's actually proposing that we do that. Second of all, if we were, why not just have a conversation about, okay, here's what the science says are the potential negative outcomes for having a gas stove in your house, right? How this can affect the development of your child, increase the likelihood for them to get something like asthma, how this can affect your personal health. I mean, all of those different things. That's the conversation that you would actually be having if you were a remotely serious person, right? If you actually cared about these issues. But instead, they just always create this into this reactionary feedback loop, this reactionary cycle where we can't actually even attempt to make progress on any issue whatsoever that would improve the world, that would improve society, that would improve our country, okay? Because that is somehow part of this woke neo-Marxist agenda where they're trying to rip away your freedoms and destroy the United States and Western civilization as it exists right now. So, I mean, there you have it. There's the update. I'm sure, again, we're going to see this over the next couple of days. If you're going outside, especially if you live in New York, I'd probably be wearing a mask. It's not at that point here in DC. I haven't really been, just chilling outside for long periods of time. So I haven't been wearing a mask, but, be careful out there because it looks like an absolute demon world right now.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying